The river did not arrive like a disaster. It arrived like a trespasser. Sometime after midnight, while the hills above Lee County sat black under the last of the March rain, Big Stony Fork slipped out of the bend where it had lived for longer than anyone on the Mercer place could remember. It did not crash through the bottomland. It did not announce itself against the barn. It simply found the low place, took it, and kept moving. At first light in 1974, Caleb Mercer opened the back door and heard a sound that did not belong there. Water. Not the old sound from beyond the cottonwoods along the property line. This sound was closer, lower, moving through the place where his spring oats should have been breathing up through the mud. He stepped off the porch in his chore boots and walked past the chicken house without calling to Ruth. He did not need to. A man who has worked the same ground for 43 years can feel trouble in his feet before he can name it. The river had cut across his best bottom. 24 acres of black, heavy soil, the kind of earth Caleb had spent half a lifetime making better, sat under a wide brown sheet of current. The old row marks were gone. The corner fence was folded over like wet string. A walnut post his father had driven before the war leaned halfway into the new channel, holding on by one strip of wire and habit. Caleb stopped at the edge of the water. He did not curse. He did not run. He just stood there while the river passed in front of him with the calm certainty of something that had already made its decision. That strip of bottomland was not just a pretty field. It was the difference between paying the bank in October and asking for mercy in November. It was where the Mercers got their cleanest hay. It was where the corn stood tallest in the dry years. It was the field Caleb's father had once called, with no poetry at all, the part that keeps a roof honest. Caleb was 63 that spring. He had a right shoulder that clicked when the weather changed, a left knee that had never forgiven a mule for spooking in 1958, and a way of working that made younger men call him slow until they realized he was still going after they had sat down. He owned one old Ford 8N tractor, one disc harrow with more weld than factory metal, and a pickup that rattled so badly Ruth could tell which road he was on by the sound. He did not own a bulldozer. He did not own savings. He did not own the luxury of letting water choose the shape of his life. By noon, Caleb knew the flood was not the real problem. A flood leaves. This had not left. The river had found a new route. The cut was deeper than it had been at sunrise. The current was shaving soil from the inside edge and carrying it off in curling strips, dark ribbons of work vanishing toward the Powell River. Every hour it ran there, the new channel became less like an accident and more like a fact. Ruth came down to the field carrying coffee in a jar because she knew he would not come back to the house for it. She stood beside him and looked at the water. "How bad?" she asked. Caleb kept his eyes on the current. "If she stays here," he said, "we don't have a bottom field anymore." Ruth did not ask the second question. She had kept the books long enough to know the answer. There were men in the county who could move earth for money. One of them was Vernon Pike. Vernon ran pike grading and hauling out of a gravel yard near Pennington Gap. He had a yellow dozer, a backhoe, 2 dump trucks, and the kind of confidence that gets louder around people who cannot afford him. He was not the worst man in the county. He was worse than that. He was useful, and he knew it. Caleb called him from the wall phone in the kitchen that afternoon. Vernon came the next morning in a tan Chevrolet with clean fenders and a clipboard on the seat. He walked the bank, stepped over the fallen fence, looked at the new cut, and made the noise a man makes when he wants the price to hurt before he says it. He told Caleb what would have to happen: push material into the cut, rebuild the outer bank, cut a relief trench, bring in riprap, machine time, fuel, labor. 2 days if the weather held, 3 if it didn't. Then he wrote a number on the back of a fuel receipt: $3,800. In 1974, to Caleb Mercer, that number was not a bill. It was a verdict. Caleb looked at it, folded the receipt once, and handed it back. "I appreciate you coming," he said. Vernon watched him a second too long. "You fixin' to let the river keep it?" "No." Vernon's mouth bent toward a smile. "You got somebody cheaper?" Caleb looked back at the field. "I got somebody older." Vernon laughed because he thought Caleb meant himself. In a way, he did. By Saturday, the story had already made its way through the county. The river had taken Mercer's bottom. Pike had quoted the job, Caleb had turned him down. And now, depending on who was doing the telling, he was either praying over it, staring at it, or planning to put the river back with his bare hands. At Hobbs' feed, a man named Earl Tiller set down his coffee and said, "Caleb's a steady man, but steady don't make water climb uphill." Someone else asked what he had planned. "Rocks," Earl said. That made the counter go quiet for half a second. Then somebody chuckled. Not loud, not cruel enough to call it cruel, just the little laugh people give when they are relieved the foolishness belongs to someone else. But Caleb was not building a monument to stubbornness. He was remembering. 3 days after the river moved, he drove up into the hollows where road crews had cut through limestone years before and where flat stones lay loose under the laurel. He took only the ones with weight and faces, no round creek stones, no pretty ones, nothing that rolled. He wanted slabs that would bite when set against each other, stones with edges that could argue. He loaded them into the pickup by hand. The truck squatted under the weight by the second trip. By the fifth, one rear spring complained with a sound like a rifle bolt. Caleb heard it, tightened the rope over the load, and kept going. Ruth watched him back into the lane that evening, mud on the doors, hands scraped white at the knuckles. "You buying anything for this project?" she asked. "Gloves," Caleb said. The next morning he spent $18 at Hobbs' feed on 2 pairs of rubber gloves and a roll of baling twine. That was the full cash cost of his plan. $18 against a river. A man can look ridiculous for less. Caleb began at the upstream throat of the new channel, where the river had first entered his field. That detail mattered. To anyone watching from the road, it looked like the wrong place to start. The water was faster there. The bank was raw there. The mud would not hold a footprint. A machine operator would have attacked the whole cut at once, shoved dirt in, built a hard stop, made the river obey for as long as the dirt lasted. Caleb did not try to stop it. That was the part people missed. He was not trying to beat the river. He was trying to offer it an easier memory. His grandfather had called the thing a wing wall. His father had called it a river finger. Caleb had no name for it that sounded important. It was a low-angled stone guide, dry stacked in the current, built to pull water away from the fresh wound and nudge it back toward its older, deeper bed. Not a dam, not a wall of force. A suggestion heavy enough for water to respect. The first 4 days looked like failure. Caleb worked in shin-deep current with a hickory pole in one hand and stone in the other. He placed the largest slabs first, feeling with his boot for the firmest part of the creek bottom before lowering each one. The water slapped his calves. Mud climbed his trousers. Now and then a stone shifted, and he would lift it out, turn it, and set it again. From the county road, none of it made sense. Kurt Blaylock, who farmed the place north of Caleb and had bought a new Massey Ferguson the year before, stopped by the fence on the second afternoon. "Caleb," he called, "what are you setting out there?" Caleb did not look up. "First course." "First course of what?" "Something the river can lean on." Kurt waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. "You think that'll hold?" Caleb pressed both hands against the stone he had just placed. It did not move. "I don't need it to hold everything," he said. "I need it to hold enough." Kurt looked at the river, then at the little run of stones barely showing above the water. He nodded the way men nod when they are being polite to a lost cause. By evening, 2 boys in a red truck slowed on the road and hollered something Caleb did not catch. He heard the laugh after, bright and careless. The sound carried over the water and died in the wet grass. Caleb set another stone. His father, Noah Mercer, had taught him long before that work has a language people watching from a distance cannot hear. Noah had been a quiet man with rough palms and no patience for display. Once, when Caleb was 17 and angry because a neighbor had mocked their old equipment, Noah had said, "Son, the fence rail has the best view of the field and still never grows a thing." Caleb had remembered that sentence for 46 years. He remembered it now, while men with clean boots decided what they thought of him. The angle was the whole secret. Too square to the current, and the river would hit the guide like a fist and tear around it. Too shallow, and the water would skim along it without changing. Caleb set the line at roughly 1 handspan out for every 2 handspans down, a long diagonal from the torn bank toward the older channel. He checked it with the hickory pole, laying the pole along the top of the stones, stepping back, sighting down it the way another man might sight down a rifle barrel. He built from the water outward, not the bank inward. That made it look even more foolish. The first stones sat alone in the current, like mistakes. The river ran over them as if insulted by the interruption. For days there was no visible progress except the growing pile of stone and the slower way Caleb climbed the porch steps at night. Ruth did not tell him to stop. She warmed towels by the stove. She rubbed his shoulder with liniment. She put his supper where he could reach it without straightening too far. On the sixth night, she asked, "Is it listening yet?" Caleb closed his eyes. Not yet. On the seventh morning, he saw the first small sign. A curl, not a turn, not a victory, just a narrow seam of slower water gathering on the upstream side of the guide. Silt settled there in a soft fan. A leaf that should have shot straight through the new channel hesitated, circled once, and drifted toward the old bend. Caleb watched it go. Then he went back for more stone. The second stage was slower because it could not be rushed. He filled the gaps between the foundation slabs with smaller, flat pieces, each one fitted like a tooth. If a stone rocked under hand pressure, it came out. If a stone left a straight joint through the wall, it came out. If a stone was handsome but wrong, it came out. The work did not care how tired he was. Dry stone in water is not a pile. A pile is what a man makes when he is in a hurry. A dry stacked guide has to lock itself together so the pressure that wants to break it becomes the pressure that tightens it. Mortar would have cracked. Packed clay would have washed. Loose dirt would have been gone before breakfast. But interlocked stone had patience. That was the old knowledge, not romantic knowledge, not magic, just the sort of precise rural engineering that disappears when people start believing only machines know how the world works. By the second week, the guide had risen to Caleb's knee at the upstream end and stretched almost 22 feet into the stolen channel. He left the downstream edge lower, with a slight fall to it, so high water would slide over and forward instead of dropping behind and digging at the base. Vern and Pike heard about the wall at the gas station. "Stone?" he said. "That's what they're saying," the attendant told him. "Stacked in the water?" "Seems so." Vernon wiped his hands on a rag and looked toward the road that led out past the Mercer farm. "Well," he said, "I reckon everybody needs a hobby." The third week was when the river tested him. A cold rain moved in from the west and fell for a day and a half. Not a storm, just steady weather with weight behind it. The current thickened. The water climbed 4 inches up the guide. Caleb went out anyway because the most dangerous thing you can do with water is ignore it while it is deciding. He found 2 stones shifted near the middle. Not failed, shifted. That mattered. He braced the hickory pole against the bed, leaned into the current, and worked them back into place. His gloves were slick. His right shoulder burned. Twice he had to stop and stand still until the gray sparkles left the corners of his eyes. Then his boot went out from under him. He dropped hard into the channel, one knee striking stone, one hand disappearing into brown water up to the wrist. The current shoved at his ribs. For a moment he stayed there, cold water running through his coat sleeve, breath knocked thin, the whole field blurred by rain. Across the road, a truck slowed. Caleb could feel somebody watching.
He thought of the number on Vernon's receipt. He thought of the counter at Hobbs' feed. He thought of the field his father had trusted him to keep. Then he got one foot under him, then the other. He stood up, found the shifted stone by feel, and seated it with both hands. No one in the truck clapped. No one needed to. By the 21st day, the guide was finished. It did not cross the whole channel. That was deliberate.
Caleb left a narrow opening on the far side, no wider than a wagon tongue, and set 3 heavy capstones there at a sharper downstream angle. A full closure would have made the river fight. A narrow invitation made it choose. The river still ran through the stolen cut that night, but it no longer ran with confidence. Just before dawn on the 23rd day, Ruth woke Caleb by touching his arm. "Come listen," she said. That was all. Not "come look." "Come listen." The house was quiet. The rain had stopped. Somewhere far off, a rooster made a tired attempt at morning. Caleb sat up and heard what she meant. The water sound had moved. For nearly a month, the new channel had filled the house with a low, constant rush, as if loss itself had learned to run beneath their windows. Now that sound was thinner, farther away, broken by spaces. Caleb pulled on his boots and walked out in the blue light. The stolen channel was falling. Not empty, not dramatic, not like a door slamming shut. The river was not the kind of thing to admit it had changed its mind all at once. But the level was lower than it had been the evening before. Mud showed along the edge. The current that had once crossed the field in a single strong pull now dragged weakly along the guide, folded at the capstones, and slipped toward the old bed. Big Stony Fork was turning back. Caleb stood there with Ruth beside him. For a long time neither of them spoke. The guide did not look heroic. It looked like a low, dark line of wet limestone in a muddy field. No plaque, no machinery tracks, no engineer's flag. Nothing that would make a stranger stop and understand what had happened. But the river understood. By Saturday, the stolen channel had dropped to a narrow run. By Monday, grass stems showed through the upper stretch. By the first week of April, the old channel carried the main current again, deep and steady under the cottonwoods, while the bottom field lay waterlogged, but still there. Bruised, yes. Rutted, yes. Full of silt and broken fence wire and work that would have to be done. But there. Caleb took the Ford 8N into the field as soon as the soil could bear weight. The first pass was ugly. The disc dragged up roots and river trash. Wet clods rolled under the blades. The tractor coughed twice and smoked at the stack. Kurt Blaylock came to the fence while Caleb turned at the end of the row. He stood there a while with his hands in his jacket pockets. Finally, he said, "I didn't think that would work." Caleb eased the tractor out of gear. "Most of the river didn't either," he said. Kurt laughed once, softly, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else to do with being wrong in public. The county learned the news the same way it had learned the doubt. Through the feed store, through the church lot, through the line at the bank.
through men who had slowed their trucks to watch an old farmer make a fool of himself, and now slowed again to see what a fool had saved. Vernon Pike heard it at the gas station on a Tuesday morning. The attendant said, "Mercer got his bottom back." Vernon looked up from the pump. "With what?" "You know with what." Vernon said nothing for a few seconds. Then he looked down at his boots, at the gravel, at the diesel stain spreading under the nozzle. "Dry stone," he said. It was not a question. "Dry stone," the attendant said. "Cost him $18. Vernon gave a little nod, the kind a man gives when the world has handed him a fact that will not fit comfortably in his pride. He did not laugh. People later made a great deal of that, because there are men who apologize with words and men who apologize by losing the sound in their mouth. Vernon was the second kind. But the better part of the story came a month later. In early May, after the bottom field had begun to green at the higher end, Vernon Pike drove back to the Mercer farm. This time his truck was not spotless. This time he did not bring a clipboard. Caleb was mending the corner fence when Vernon came up the lane. Ruth saw him from the kitchen window and stood there with one hand on the curtain, watching. Vernon walked to the fence and took off his hat. That alone was enough to make Caleb set down his pliers. "I got a job over near Dryden," Vernon said. "Road shoulder keeps slipping under a bank. I cut it twice, packed it twice. Keeps giving way when the spring water gets under it." Caleb waited. Vernon looked toward the bottom field, then back at him. "I reckon you may know a thing I don't." There was no grand moment in it, no speech, no satisfaction sharp enough to draw blood. Caleb had the right to send him away. He didn't. He put on his coat, climbed into Vernon's truck, and rode over the mountain.
At the job site, Caleb did what he had always done. He looked before he answered. He walked the shoulder. He pushed his boot into the wet soil. He watched where the seep water came through under the bank. He picked up a stone and turned it in his hand. Then he told Vernon the road was not failing because it lacked dirt. It was failing because the water had nowhere decent to spend its pressure. He marked a low stone apron along the toe of the bank, angled to spread the seep sideways before it could lift the packed fill. He told Vernon not to seal it tight. Let the water breathe. Let it lose its strength in pieces. Vernon did it. The shoulder held. After that, people noticed that Pike Grading started using more stone and less bluff. Vernon still charged good money. He still drove a truck that stayed cleaner than most. He did not become humble all at once, because men rarely change in a way that convenient. But he never again laughed at a farmer for carrying rocks. Years later, Caleb's grandson asked him why he helped Vernon after Vernon had laughed. Caleb was sitting on the porch then, older and thinner, watching Big Stony Fork move in its proper bed beyond the cottonwoods. The stone guide was still there, mostly hidden by grass and silt, doing its quiet work whenever the river rose. He thought about the question. Then he said, "Knowing a thing is not the same as owning it." The boy waited because he could tell there was more. Caleb nodded toward the river. If I only use what I know to prove another man wrong, it ends with me. If I use it to keep something from washing out, it lasts past me. That was as close as Caleb Mercer ever came to explaining himself. The world will always have men like Vernon Pike, men with equipment, invoices, clean trucks, and a number written down like it is the only door in the room. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes the bulldozer is exactly what the job requires. But not every problem is solved by force. Some problems have to be read. A river does not care how expensive your machine is. It does not care who laughed first. It only cares about grade, pressure, angle, and the path that costs it least. Caleb Mercer saved his bottom field because he understood that before he touched a single stone. He did not overpower the water. He gave it a better way to be itself. And once the river saw that path, it took it. Understanding works like that, quietly, patiently, without asking anyone on the road to believe in it first. It sets one stone, then another, until the thing everyone thought could not be moved begins, almost on its own, to turn.